And we are live, everybody. Welcome to the Café Hangout.
It's John Pollock and Wai Ting. It's Thursday. It's 3 o'clock p.m. That means the wrestling world stops as we hang out. How are you, Wai?
Doing pretty well. Yourself?
I'm doing well. It is the depths of the summer, and the schedule is very, very busy, and we are navigating as best we can. And I think today we have a really loaded show, because we are going to be talking about a bunch of news items that are just coming at us at a furious pace, all led by the WWE second quarter earnings call, which we are going to hold off on breaking down until our guest, Bryan Thurston, joins us, which is only going to be in about 15 minutes time from now. He will be on to help us break down, make sense of the numbers, and go through a juicy earnings call.
Juicy, is that how you would describe it? Is that how the stockholders would describe it?
Maybe a little bloody. There were a lot of guts displayed and all that other crap. Yes. So if you were a fan that has been circling the waters for the WWE to feed you something AEW related, this earnings call was all the meat you could handle, because Vince McMahon didn't give an F on this earnings call and gave you plenty to sink your teeth into. So we'll talk all about that, and always look forward to having Bryan Thurston on the show from Wrestlenomics. He did a great kind of primer to get everybody ready for this earnings call. I mean, this is like one of AEW's big shows, or a big four show from WWE for Brandon, and he did his big preview of this earnings call.
He did a kickoff, essentially.
He did a kickoff, yes, a very entertaining one. Yeah. So looking forward to chatting with him, as well as your phone calls, which we will be taking in the second half of the show. So if you are listening live, first of all, thank you very much. And the call number for later on today, 732-800-4423, or look up Post Wrestling on Skype. We'll be dedicating time to all of you fine folks listening live with your thoughts on the earnings call or any of the other big news stories that are going on in professional wrestling today. And I think we can dive in and quickly go through some of the headlines to start things off. I wanted to get this out of the way first, because I heard from one person today with the WWE that told me the reason for Daniel Bryan being off TV this week was that he had some vacation time. So that was the reason he wasn't on the show this week. And there is a program planned for Bryan, which I'm going to assume is going to be probably set off next week. We would see. He's not linked to anyone right now, but it sounds like they do have a program in mind for him. And that was the reason, at least this week, that he wasn't there.
Now, was that set to take place before he teased making a big career change in the announcement?
That I don't know. I don't know if the announcement was to lead to this program or if they're going somewhere else. But it just seems like this week he was not going to be on TV because of this vacation. So okay. That's I would expect him to be back next week. So that's what's going on with Daniel Bryan. Jimmy Uso, Jonathan Fatu, was arrested early Thursday morning, just after 3 a.m. Eastern time in Pensacola, Florida. And he was pulled over after he had been spotted driving erratically and swerving in his car. And TMZ were the ones to report this. He was pulled over, and when they tried to administer a breathalyzer, he refused and was brought in and facing a charge of driving under the influence, as well as a speeding citation that he's facing. SportsIllustrated.com adding that he has since been released, responsible for his own personal actions. Now, the timing of this could not be more embarrassing. Days after the Usos were the subject of John Cena's one-liner mocking them for their arrests in the past, Jonathan Fatu, it should be added, this is his third time being arrested for a DUI since 2011. He also had the incident this past year where, while he wasn't driving, he ended up getting out of the passenger side when he was with his wife Trinity and got into a semi-altercation with police officers that he was arrested for, later had a plea agreement and paid a fine for. I don't think that this statement WWE puts out, I just don't think that's sufficient any longer. This is something that, and here this happens just days later, and I don't know what they're expecting here, where this happens and we just ignore it so it goes away. I don't know if that's the best course of action.
Yeah, with the way that I guess they handle it, it seems to suggest that, or at least on TV is what I mean. It seems to suggest that they believe it's not of enough
It's a
concern.
24-hour story in their mind, and we're going to give the most baseline response, and it's going to go away. And maybe they're right. Maybe this story does go away, but I think that this is something that you should be concerned with. Like, drinking and driving is not some nothing offense.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And this is, I think one time is, perhaps it's something you can dismiss as saying this was not good, but maybe no cause of that much concern if it's an isolated incident. But this is not that. This is a multiple time offense for Jimmy Uso. This is something that I feel like could be met with a bit more internal discussion and punishment.
We'll see. That's what the WWE statement is what they put out today. CM Punk did an interview with a friend of the show, Mark Ramundi, at ESPN, and I'm sure that this interview is going to get some people talking. He talked about doing StarCast, and then kind of went as deep as I can recall him going about, like, Mark really pressed him here. Basically, are you going to AEW? Is there a chance you're going to AEW? Is anything imminent with AEW? And, Punk was like I felt open here about the fact he agreed to do StarCast because it's in his city. He doesn't have to travel for it. He was asked about his relationship with AEW, and you could see kind of a sense of annoyance that if he mentioned to Matt Jackson, like, hey, have a great show tonight, referring to Double or Nothing. And he said, somehow that turns into Tony Khan telling people he has a great relationship with me. I said in the past, I've talked to them, but nothing ever came of anything. And he goes on to say that the last contact he had, he got a text from Cody Rhodes, and he said, and again, I almost don't even know how to reply to them sometimes, because if I reply, they do interviews and are like, quote, oh yeah, I just talked to Punk, end quote. I'm kind of damned if I do, damned if I don't. I always think if somebody wants to do business with me, they can come talk to me. Texting offers isn't really a way to do business. And when Mark followed up asking if there was an offer via text, he says, it was texted through 3 people and an offer came in through text. And he said it was about a month ago, maybe. And just said it was a general offer. I never could have done the last one in Las Vegas because it was the same night he was in California for CFFC, which is the group that he does commentary for on Fight Pass. So, I mean, this really does come across like a guy that, doesn't seem to have much, like, he's not really hiding his cards here or trying to mislead the public. I don't dismiss it out of hand that this guy one day could show up on an AEW screen, but I would say if he had any kind of ulterior motives, he's not doing an interview like this and characterizing the Bucks and Cody like this, where it just seems like he wants to do his thing and not be kind of thrown out there as bait in the public where they're raising the expectation level of the audience, because he knows that, at least at this current mindset, is he's not going there.
Seems to indicate a level of frustration, actually, with the way that the Bucks or AEW might be kind of.
This was a pretty defensive response to it, that they're kind of like letting the audience get their hopes up, and they're not dismissing anything. And he's really not at that level. He's not considering it.
Yeah, I haven't read the whole interview yet, but it almost seems like from those quotes, it seems like he's wanting a more serious offer.
He has brought up that before about, like, a text is not an offer. Like, he, show me some level of commitment, pick up the phone, come see me. That's been something that and I don't think he's wrong. Like, if you're talking about, sometimes people want to feel wanted, and it's much more than a text. That does seem to be, if you want to really engage in serious talks, it's got to be a little more formal.
Why don't you think AEW has already done that if they're serious about wanting Punk? Are they serious about wanting Punk?
I would think so. I would think, why wouldn't you want Punk when you want to make as big a splash as possible on television? I would also look at it that they are riding a ton of momentum right now. Is now the exact time you want CM Punk. StarCast, or not StarCast, but All Out is completely sold out. Yes, it's a big wow moment. You want to build up for that first television show with something as big as possible. So there's certainly that incentive to get him on that first show. But there's also the idea that 6 months from now, when we don't have all of the promotion behind our debut and we want to pull something out of our hat, something big to really spark things, this could be a card we play down the road. There's many different ways of thinking about it. I don't think CM Punk has closed the door on wrestling completely, but I'd say it's like 90% shut. It really feels like this is a guy that is not, other than that one run-in he did in The Mask that kind of showed you like this guy still has some kind of a romanticism towards pro wrestling.
Why would he demand a real offer if he's shut the door that much?
Yeah, maybe. I think ultimately this is a guy that, let's put it this way. If Tony Khan, if the Elite, if they wanted to sit down and have a meeting with Punk, I think Punk's taking that meeting. Whereas WWE, if they said, hey, can we sit down and talk? I don't think he's even giving them the time of day.
To me, it seems to indicate, at least from those quotes, that he's willing to sit down and talk, but it's talking seriously.
And maybe that's it. Maybe that is the that old analogy on the Cosby Show where Bill Cosby explains that you had a fine steak dinner, but you presented it to me on a garbage can lid. It's all in the presentation and not necessarily what was included in the meal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's one of my only Cosby Show memories. And probably Cosby Show is not something that's referenced all that much in today's society. So anyway, the CM Punk interview is up on ESPN. Mark Raimondi sat down and chatted with him about a number of issues, including his status. He is still on the UFC roster. His exact quote was, "I believe I am. I peed into a cup not too long ago." So there he is. That is his status. And he seems to love doing commentary for CFFC, which I always thought he would do pretty well at as a natural fan of the sport. And other than that, our other final news item here, we didn't get to this on Wednesday night show, but ROH and the NWA, they are not working together any longer. That's effective immediately. So Nick Aldis will no longer be part of the Summer Supercard that is happening in Toronto on August the 9th. And it was said from the ROH side that it was an amicable split and they're going separate ways. I kind of looked at these two, like these two would be beneficial to one another. I think the NWA, that gives them a lot of people to work with. And if there is one thing that the NWA has carved out, in my opinion, it's the ability to show that they can promote a big match. And I think they proved that with Cody and Nick Aldis. And I can't help but watch the Road to series and think that Cody was greatly influenced by that buildup that the NWA and Lightning One did for that match at All In last year. And that's something I think ROH struggles at, is building up their big matches. They got a great roster, but sometimes when it comes to building up big stories, big matches, I think that's something they sometimes fall short on. And that's something I think the NWA, they have shown an ability to be very good storytellers.
Yeah, certainly. I think at a time when public perception of ROH is that perhaps they're getting away from more of the sporting aspect, classic pro wrestling storytelling, it seems like NWA has been continuing to double down on that type of pro wrestling product. So I'm a little disappointed to hear that they're no longer working together. If anything, I feel like both companies would have really benefited from being a bit more kind of ingrained with one another.
Yeah, I mean, it's it was somewhat that you just look at just so many options out there. The NWA, like, they're going to continue to do their thing, and it's just you look at kind of, there's only so many hours in the day to follow everything. So
I really want to see more, like I would say, of these promotions working together in general rather than splitting apart. I think ultimately they're going to have to in order to make any sort of traction when you have, giants that are forming around you now.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So we are going to be joined by Brandon Thurston momentarily to chat about the second quarter earnings report. And Wai, you don't always follow these earnings calls, but you got to call into this one, and I definitely want your thoughts on what your impression was, because this was quite the earnings call to call in and get Vince McMahon, a pretty animated Vince McMahon. That is not always the case on these calls. Mm-hmm. So we'll get into all of that, but joining us now on the line, he is a staple. When there's an earnings call, we put out the Brandon Thurston signal up into the air, and here he joins us here on the Café Hangout. Brandon, how are you doing today?
How's it going, John and Wai? It is a happy WWE Q2 day.
Yes, it's our time to get into the weeds, Brandon. There were so many gems on this particular one, but getting into the weeds seemed to be Vince McMahon's big go-to. That was his big talking point on this show, or on this call.
Blood and guts, gore, and getting into the weeds.
I want to start there because, Vince McMahon, he comes with quite the reputation of someone that is, very bombastic in these public settings, but not so much on these earnings calls. Like, it's very much a reserved Vince McMahon who will pivot over to George Barrios, who does the heavy lifting and breaking through all the numbers, and you'll get Vince in and out. But this to me was Vince McMahon without specifically naming AEW, doing all but bringing up TNT, like this was the most animated Vince in quite some time on one of these calls that AEW clearly has registered with Vince McMahon.
Yeah, it really was. I thought that was the headline coming away from this. It's not really a financial news or a metric or a number, but he didn't name AEW by name, but he was clearly referring to AEW. There's no doubt when he mentioned TNT, he really tried to, on two separate occasions during this call, he brought up competition, and he did like at one point say that to the extent that they are competition, sort of downplaying fact that he was referring to whatever he was referring to as competition. But yeah, he really tried to frame AEW as this overly violent, gory crap. And I just imagine so what's he referring to? Like, I guess the Cody and Dustin Rhodes match was really bloody, right? But I wonder if he was just somebody showed him what Dean was doing, and he was rolling around in thumbtacks and barbed wire with Joey Janela on a Fyter Fest, and he must have thought to himself, what is this violent crap? But yeah, he really went after AEW and sort of tried to frame it, even almost like speaking to TNT. Like he said, I don't know if TNT will stand for that. I can't imagine that they would. Sort of making it sound like this is not a brand that one would want to advertise with.
Yeah, and the way the question was thrown at him regarding competition, it led to Vince McMahon explaining that they would have a more edgier product in WWE, but it would stay PG, and that they would not be going back to that blood and guts product from the Attitude Era, which a potential competitor may be doing, in reference to AEW, adding that we have graduated from that crap and are a more sophisticated product. And I would say that it was pretty stunning to just see how much he focused upon AEW here. But also, I wonder how the messaging is of this, Brandon, of stating that here's this hot product and we are not going to do any of that stuff that certainly your core wrestling audience is kind of been galvanized by over these past couple of months, and stating we're not going to be doing that, almost stating that they're going to have that area of the playground for our audience to get that form of professional wrestling from.
Yeah, I mean, like I think about the audience that he's talking to. He's talking to analysts and investors, and not necessarily wrestling fans or people who are really familiar with the wrestling industry. But there's a lot of talk going into this of how on the last call, a lot of these metric declines were explained away by Vince McMahon, saying that, hey, look, we had all these talent absences and all the talent was back. And I was really skeptical that was a good way to explain that. I don't think that there was that much talent that made that much of a difference in their absence in Q2 to be responsible for the metric declines that we saw. So going into this, I did a lot of research looking at how are things doing now in Q2, and it looked like things were down. And George Barrios, the co-president, had a slide in the investor presentation giving monthly breakdowns, the level of detail that we usually don't get. Going over how in April the decline was pretty strong, but by June, well, things were still declining, but it wasn't as bad, which was their attempt to make an argument that we are turning the corner here, and the W popularity and the product is getting better, and that of course gets us into Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff. I don't recall if they were actually named by name. Their names are spelled out in the investor presentation, but they were definitely referred to as the two new executive directors that are going to be in charge of Raw and SmackDown, so that Vince McMahon can stand back and concentrate on more, I think he said, a longer-term story arc view of storylines, and he can focus on talent development. I can't imagine what that really means. Like, as he said, as we're joking here at the beginning, Vince McMahon is going to get out of the weeds and not be as directly involved, and to have more of an oversight or more overview of the creative process. At least that's the way it was framed in this conference call.
Yeah, it was an interesting tack to take, that it was like, I didn't take it to mean that Vince McMahon's role is going to be all that different with something as vague as not getting into the weeds. But clearly this guy is the showrunner, and I wonder too how, the people on that call necessarily react to, the perception, at least, that Vince McMahon is kind of loosening his grip on the product, that, for the most part, they see this guy as the genie here that is able to just wave his magic wand and fix all the problems.
I do think the stock market, like at large, when we talk about the idea of when Vince McMahon won't be around anymore, we don't know what the succession plan is, but there probably is one. And one of the big risk factors that WWE lists in all of their quarterly reports and annual reports is that the possibility that Vince McMahon, who is our head of creative, et cetera, would not be around. It could adversely affect the business. I think the stock market takes Vince seriously as somebody who is really integral to the W being what it is, but yeah, I don't know that he can't bring in Eric Bischoff and Paul Heyman and sort of tell a story of like how he's letting these guys do whatever they're going to do. But I don't really buy for a second that Vince McMahon is going to step away from the creative process and that it's going to change greatly, or that's going to change to such an extent that the metric declines that we're seeing lately are going to really stop. Or at least, I don't know, maybe there's a hard floor for how far some of these things can fall, but I don't see a big change happening because of the executive director hires of Heyman and Bischoff. But yeah,
when Vince says they've definitely turned the corner on, I suppose, some of the criticisms and controversies when those were brought up on this call, how convincing of a job do you think that he managed to, tell his shareholders that, hey, look, January, we're not bleeding as much. We're still bleeding, but we're not bleeding as much. Do you think that it was a satisfying response?
like in my opinion, no, I don't. It didn't convince me that the declines in attendance and W Network subscribers and in TV ratings are about to be turned around. But you look at the stock price today; it's up. Last I looked at it, it was up 8%. This is following all this new information, all these updated metrics that we've gotten today. So the wider investment community either is convinced by it, or I think more likely it just doesn't matter that much to them. Because again, when you talk about what is this business, it's largely, I think 30% last year and even more this year and even more than that in years forward is going to be from TV rights. And these new TV rights deals from NBC Universal and Fox, they get kicked in October, and it's going to be a 3.6x average annual value over what they already have, which is already huge money. So these metrics that we're talking about that are in the decline, with the exception of maybe TV ratings, because that's where the TV rights come from, is from highly rated TV programs. But they can do bad attendance, they can do bad WWE Network numbers, and they can still be a pretty healthy business because they have enormous TV rights fees. So I think that is like the overall story of this business and the tension of WWE as a business over the last few years, and even more so going forward because the rights are increasing dramatically, is that this is a company that's not necessarily in the tradition of, when we think back on wrestling history and the economics of the business and how so-and-so drew so much money and so-and-so set the territory on fire. This is not a company that's so dependent on selling tickets or even selling pay-per-views or network subscriptions, because they are so protected and so secure by enormous TV rights fees, just because of the way that the media landscape has changed in the last several years with this premium on live content.
So just getting into some of the numbers coming out of this quarter. So the net income for the second quarter, which of course includes WrestleMania and the card in Saudi Arabia back in June, net income of $10.4 million, which is slightly up from last year's quarter, and then revenue of $268.9 million, down from $281.6 last year. Given WrestleMania, and this can certainly dovetail into the status of the WWE Network and its subscriber base, was this around your projections, Brandon? Did it exceed or come short in terms of what you expected for what's always kind of a big monster quarter for the company?
Yeah, I don't really get into super deep financial predictions, but because there's a lot of moving parts in there that I'm not an accounting expert, that I don't really understand. But you always expect Q2, which for the last several years has been the quarter that contains WrestleMania, to be their biggest quarter, especially in the live events department. Like we saw in Q1, the company barely or not make a profit on live events, and the same thing for Q3 of last year. So it's been hard for the live events business, and but of course WrestleMania does okay, because we have one huge event that in the case of this year's WrestleMania does $16.9 million at the live gate. But this was still in the live events division, they call it. This was still the revenue for live events was down in this Q2 versus the Q2 of the prior year and the year before that. So it is declining even within this big WrestleMania quarter. And just looking over the trending schedules and things so far today, it looks like that was largely driven by international ticket sales. Of course, W does two big international tours, one in Q2, one in Q4. And international ticket sales, which they do break out from North American sales, that was down quite a bit in this Q2 versus the Q2 of the prior year. So that's what that looks like it was largely about there. I should mention too, like merchandise was down. Also, you would think you'd have a big venue merchandise quarter because you've got WrestleMania there and all the events that go around WrestleMania. Think about how many people are there and how many people are buying merchandise on that WrestleMania weekend with NXT and Hall of Fame and Raw and SmackDown. But overall, merchandise, both online sales and venue sales, has continued to be in a downward trend.
Do you, coming out of the information from this call, do you have any more clear indication of perhaps how much the Saudi Arabia show might have generated?
The number this time in the other media segment, which is where they obscure the Saudi Arabia money, that was in the 50 million range. There was a lot of really confusing talk to me on this call about the Saudi Arabia stuff. I don't know if you guys made any more sense out of it than I did. But there's talk of so WWE is projecting $1 billion in revenue for the full year. That would be a record. $200 million in adjusted EBITDA for the year. That would be a record.
Yep.
Like that projection, George Barrios said, is now dependent on as much of a downside as $10 million, depending on something about the Saudi Arabia deal. And so it's a live events media deal, but also a media rights deal. It sounds like maybe through the Saudi government, they're going to get some sort of broadcast rights deal to maybe broadcast Raw and SmackDown or like, I don't know, pay-per-views or something like that.
Was it specifically mentioned that the TV would be in Saudi Arabia or just
Yes, they mentioned that it was through the General Sports Authority that, in order to hit the figures that Brandon just outlined for the record this year, it is contingent on a second large-scale international event that is the Saudi Arabia show, and then this other media rights deal that are... while they expect them, they gave significant caution to, almost as though like they wanted to really, put a cushion underneath that it's not 100% either of these happens. When I first heard them mention the TV deal, I thought maybe this is just conflated with the India deal, but it really seems like those are completely separate things, that they are hopeful of the India renewal, and then on top of this kind of left field deal in Saudi Arabia that could be worth an enormous amount. It really came out of this call as something that could be a bonus that I don't know how many people expected this to be in the mix as well.
Yeah, I would have to go back and check, but I think so. They had, and I think it ended. They had a deal with a network called OSN in the Middle East region, and there's talk throughout this report and throughout this presentation about the MENA region, MENA, which is Middle East North Africa. So maybe this is something that would sort of replace that in that region. But yeah, it was strange. There was also a confusing note in there too about how I think Barrios at one point said that he was going to the money that they were expecting in Q4 they reported now in Q2 or something like that. And some of this was just confusing, and it wasn't really cleared up to me by anybody in the Q&A. And they tend to be obfuscating and decline to get into a lot of detail in the Q&A anyway. Yeah.
When it comes to the network number, at the end of the quarter, they had a total of 1,636,000 total subscribers. And also, like, what did you see of the breakdown for the WrestleMania number? Which on WrestleMania Day, it was a total of 2 million, combined with 233,000 of those were free subscribers. But not enormous, but definitely a decline from Mania the year prior.
Yeah, this is a number that we got in the last quarter, actually, because the last quarter, so Q1, which covers January through March, was actually, it's always reported about a month later, right? So this was already after WrestleMania had happened, and so they gave us that detail last quarter that WrestleMania, the day after WrestleMania, total count was down from the prior year's WrestleMania, and that's where I said, well, now the W Network becomes a metric that more directly reflects, I think, W popularity. But yeah, they also projected in the previous quarter that W Network subscribers would be about what they turned out to be, which is down 6% from the prior Q2. And then they projected that in Q3, which we're in the middle of right now, is going to be they project was 1.53 million average paid subscribers throughout the quarter, and that would be down 8%. So yeah, the popularity of W Network or of W content is not being turned around, at least in that area.
There was also a little bit more detail about perhaps some of the rebranding of the WWE Network. Yesterday, of course, there was a mail blast talking about the new interface updates. But here they also mentioned about the new tiering system that would take place. But I still found it relatively vague. But they talked about how there would be a free tier and then a premium tier and then further localization into local languages. What did you gather from all that discussion?
Right, we know there's going to be a new platform, better search, which I think is anybody who spent some time on that W Network knows that search is terrible. So hopefully we'll improve that. But yeah, 3 tiers it sounds like now: a free tier, a premium tier, and more languages. And I believe Barrios said that they would go in that order: a free tier first, a premium tier after that, and then the localized languages after that. He said within the next 12 months. So yeah, so a new platform, better search, but yeah, 3 different tiers. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just kind of curious what the strategy is between the distinction between the free and the premium. You know, what do you foresee? Like, and really kind of maybe more from a financial sense, what is their strategy of, you know, doing something free, you know, versus perhaps a 99-cent deal?
I'm curious how they balance this free tier they're introducing with their YouTube content. Like, what is this going to, like, I can't imagine, like, they're not going to have still a significant YouTube presence that they put so much weight into, that what goes on, or is one going to mirror the other?
Yeah, I would imagine it'll be redundant in some way. I mean, if you're WWE, you know, you think about, you know, you want all this customized marketing, you want to have all this user data so you can market to everybody better and better. It's something that they talk about quite a bit. Is they have, you know, they may only have 2 million, you know, paid subscribers at the most throughout the year, but they have way more user accounts. So I think it would be like, if you think about how, you know, AEW is trying to use BR Live, where they do these free events that you don't have to pay for, but they just want you to create an account. So it sort of breaks down the friction between you paying for a pay-per-view later. Mm. And that's not what WWE Network is obviously trying to do here. I don't see them doing a pay-per-view events on here. But it at least gets you to create an account, and they can market to you and email blast you to try to turn you into a paid subscriber at the standard rate or the premium rate or whatever. And as far as like the YouTube stuff, like maybe, and this is just purely speculation on my part, but with YouTube they have to share that revenue, right? Mm-hmm. With YouTube, and in this case, it would be more of a direct to WWE thing where they don't have to share that revenue with anybody, assuming that they do run ads on it in some form.
No clear date given on the launch, but Barrios, I believe, did say probably within the next 12 months.
Yeah, it seemed like they're going to stagger it with the free tier introduced, followed by the premium tier, and then all the localized content in the different languages. But it's going to be a 12-month span. Brandon, have you seen the new interface yet? Because for the last, I'd say 12, 14 hours, I can't even get into the WWE Network.
No, I haven't. I think I've seen a screenshot where it's supposed to look like how Netflix looks now, with the big image at the top, and you sort of scroll to the left and the right. But yeah,
they haven't updated it yet, I believe.
You know what they need? They need a slogan for this new network, and I think it should be the WWE Network. It is what it is.
Yep.
AEW Blood and Guts on Wednesdays.
Yeah, you can have Blood and Guts Friday nights, where they air their ECW library. Brock Lesnar pounding Randy Orton's forehead into his skull. Nose rings being ripped out of noses. Lots of great stuff you could do to get to your blood, guts, and other crap that we've since graduated from. That can be its own section. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I think that would really attract a lot of people. I guess before we wrap up, Brandon, I mean, this call, like, certainly I think our audience is really going to zone in on a lot of the language of how AEW is being positioned here. But I guess I just kind of want your general sense of AEW now that we're several shows in, their rollout, and as we kind of count down to October the 2nd with the official launch date now for TNT. Like, there is no denying that this company has really put their stamp on the market and really gotten real effects in terms of the WWE's business and the contract offers that are out there and what they're poised for come October. Just some of your general thoughts on their impact on the market.
Yeah, it's definitely been good for wrestlers. We hear that wrestlers are getting offered, in some cases, multiples of what they were making before. But I think what AEW has done so far has been really promising. I just put out a PDF on PayHip that people can download for free if they want to. Just looking at WWE's business, but also trying to look at what metrics that are publicly available for the other major companies, including AEW, Ring of Honor, New Japan, and Impact. And AEW's only done 3 shows so far, but their Google searches have surged above Impact, which actually is above Ring of Honor and New Japan. I think just because of its legacy of name ID throughout the years, even though it's kind of been relegated to this Pursuit channel in the U.S. that almost no one watches. But yeah, AEW's got a lot of people at least thinking about it or searching for it or trying to find out what it is. And their events so far have done pretty well with attendance. Of course, the big events have sold out really fast. The big question is, what are they going to do for a debut viewership when they do appear on TNT in October? Is it going to be over 1 million? I would say that's a good over under is maybe about 1 million viewers. And then what are they going to settle at after that? Of course, SmackDown will be doing their debut on Fox at that point too in October. But yeah, I think one thing AEW needs to do is just sort of get their YouTube consolidated. You've got YouTube channels all over, as far as like Being the Elite has its own channel, I think, and Cody's thing has its own thing, and then there's the actual AEW account there. But yeah, and
the Road to clips are now at least being uploaded on the AEW channel proper, so they're making some changes.
That's good to hear. And just like I think this is like just indicative of a good sign was that AEW's Twitter followers are already above Impact's, which of course been around forever, and that Twitter account has existed since 2009. And for whatever it's worth, AEW's Twitter followers has already exceeded Impact's Twitter followers, and maybe that's just sort of maybe a factor in that is what Twitter means within wrestling culture and culture at large. Is I think Twitter is especially good at finding niches and doing well with niche products, and maybe there's something about AEW and about wrestling that makes it do really well on the Twitter platform.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. And by the way, Brandon's PDF with all that excellent information is linked on our show description, so you can check that out yourself. But did you gather from some of those statistics that obviously certain platforms are more popular now than they were before? Because I look at a certain promotion success on Facebook as maybe indicator of their success at a time when Facebook was actually more used, whereas perhaps with an AEW, it seems to be more swing towards Twitter now.
That could be. I mean, I've got it open here. Basically, the run is, of course, WWE towers above everybody, but you have about 1.5 or 1.6 million for Impact, and Ring of Honor about 700,000, AEW at about 280,000, and New Japan, I think if you combine both the English and the Japanese, they come in at about 380,000. I don't know. I maybe just Facebook is becoming more uncool. But I think Instagram has taken over a lot of timeshare from Facebook. Luckily, Facebook owns that.
One last question for me, Brandon, was not only of course do you follow the financials of the industry very closely. You're also a professional wrestler yourself and also a trainer. So kind of like from your perspective, for all the people that are perhaps gunning for these full-time positions right now, do you get a sense that people are targeting a specific company in mind? Whereas in the past, perhaps everybody was looking towards the WWE or Performance Center, tryout or something like that. Is that more spread out these days?
That's a good question. I think it is. It's definitely more spread out today than it was a few years ago, before at least New Japan became more in the public consciousness or the public wrestling fan consciousness. But I think a lot of people, though, as far as like the people that I see that walk into the wrestling school, they're wrestling fans, and what do most wrestling fans know about? They know about WWE, so WWE still towers above everybody as far as name recognition. But I do see I see other people that maybe they just want to make a living in wrestling, however it happens to be, whether it's through WWE or some other avenue. But I do really feel and have felt since the beginning of the year that this is a really great time to be a wrestler. There's more people under contract right now, and probably increasingly so as we get closer to AEW's real TV launch date. There's more people under contract right now than there have been maybe ever. I don't know if there were contracts in the territory days or to what degree there were, but it's a great time to be a wrestler, and there's so many opportunities for wrestlers. And even WWE is, they're creating their NXT brand and their UK brand, and Triple H wants to do global localization, so maybe we'll see even more performance centers and NXT off brands as time goes on. But yeah, I do try to encourage people and explain to people, sort of how the business unfolds and sort of how to climb the ladder from your local level indies to your regional level indies, and you do further and further drives, and then maybe some of the super indies sort of take hold of you and give you exposure to the point where somebody who signs people to contracts starts to look at you. Yeah.
Well, as we sign off, Brandon, please let our listeners know where they can find more of your coverage on today's earnings report, as well as the PDF you put out and anything else you want to get out there.
Sure thing. I'll be writing an article that's underway right now for Fightful.com that will be posted later today. I've got a lot of tweets out there on Twitter at Brandon Thurston. And as you guys mentioned, I did a PDF. What did I title it? Something like WWE and Pro Wrestling Industry Q2 2019 info sheet. Sort of just bullet points and graphs about just a bunch of data that's out there to be collected that I could collect. Just about what's been happening in the pro wrestling industry between the months of April and June. And you'll find that pinned to my Twitter account right now.
And also in the show description, as mentioned, some beautiful charts, some beautiful graphs.
It's exquisite, Brandon. You just like the colors immediately they're so pleasing to the eye.
That's the most important thing. People are visual learners, I've learned on Twitter over the last 5 years or so. People want to see graphs. They want to see bright colors and things like that.
Well, Brandon, we always thank you for making time on earnings day. It's one of the big holidays of the year. If you are a follower of the professional wrestling business, and your breakdown is always fantastic to have your insight into all of these numbers and making sense of them all.
Yeah, someday here in the U.S., I hope this will become a federal holiday, so I don't have to request off from work. Because what could be more American here than WWE and the stock market? So, but thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you very much, Brandon, and we'll talk to you soon. So there you go. That is you can go check out his article later today, Fightful.com, where he'll have a very deep look at all of the numbers coming out of this. And as I mentioned off the top way, usually it's I'm on these calls, but this time you called in as well, and I just kind of wanted some of your impressions, kind of coming into this fresh, of just the presentation of the numbers, Vince's role on the call, the investors Q&A portion as well.
It's a good reminder because we actually uploaded the recording. That's why I was on, just to record it so that we can post it on our Patreon feed. We're going to start doing a lot more of these as we get to them. You can probably find this for free as well on WWE's corporate website.
If you it's a free sign up for their corporate site, and then you can access this as well.
Just to make it easy for our audience, we have this other feed out there. So on our Patreon feed, you can download that right now. For me, I've heard bits and pieces of these calls in the past, and they're incredibly formal, and I think filled with what sounds to the layman like myself a ton of financial numbers and gibberish that I really don't completely understand, and that's why we need people such as yourself and Brandon to help me digest some of it. But I think some of the more interesting, juicy details are things of him talking about the competition, talking about to me, Barrios and Wilson certainly handle more of the financial aspects, whereas creatively it seems to be Vince McMahon fielding all those questions. So I think his statements kind of jump out to me a little bit more. Whereas the rest, to me, I just kind of felt like a lot of posturing, as I think these are supposed to be. Let's hear the numbers that we have. How do we make it sound in our favor so that our shareholders will be happy?
Yeah, and I think that there's broad strokes you can take from this quarterly report. It is the big quarter of the year, the second quarter, and it was a healthy, profitable quarter with 10.4 million in their net income. But it's also you can see a picture here that there are numerous sectors of the business that would suggest a decline in popularity. And obviously, part of today's call was to kind of mitigate that with the kind of key message of the television viewership that the worst is over. And they even went to point out the numbers for July year over year, that they're actually up 1% for Raw, which includes this past week's Raw reunion, so a little bit misleading, and SmackDown being up 2%.
But designed for them to be able to use a number like that on a call like this, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, they really wanted to paint the picture that, yes, our television viewership hit a low point, but we are on the road to recovery, and that was essentially what they wanted to convey here. Live event attendance I found interesting because it was 5,800 for the quarter, but that includes WrestleMania. So if you take out WrestleMania, it was 4,700. Now, what they don't stipulate is if you would assume the Saudi Arabia number was included in there, and we never got an attendance figure for Saudi Arabia. So if you figure 25,000 people, for instance, were at that stadium.
Is that paid attendance? Is that like, how did they... there's a lot that I think we
they don't break down paid and comps. They just put out the live attendance figure. So anyway, it was 4,700 was the, you know what? That was the North American average. The international one was where the Saudi Arabia one would fit in. And that was 4,900 was the average there. So how much did Saudi Arabia play into that?
We also had paid attendance, or at least a rough estimate of where the paid attendance would be for this year's WrestleMania versus, of course, the, flubbed or whatever worked attendance.
Yes. The 82,000 that they gave. Do you have the actual the range?
Yeah.
Because they don't give a specific number, but in the KPI you can get kind of the range of what
somewhere between the area of 57,000 to 68,000. So median would be about 63,000. So there you go.
Yeah, so this is whenever you see that number that comes out the day of WrestleMania, and people always run with that number, it's like the real one comes out in their own filings, and that's when you get the legitimate number. And WrestleMania was sold out. I mean, that's what it was.
Right.
And it becomes an entertainment number that they put out there. And the rest here, like live attendance, a lot fewer shows this quarter, and that's a combination of the Monday night shows that they've been canceling quite frequently with the wild card rule, but also like they specifically stated in here to, essentially for profitability, shows that were taken off the books, that they're not going to run shows that are, not great earners for them. We saw there's a house show on Friday night that they canceled in Arkansas. That was going to be a Raw live event that they said was due to a scheduling conflict. The entire Raw roster must have karaoke night or something Friday, and they can't make it to the house show. So there's a scheduling conflict way. Date that's been on the calendar for the whole year. Scheduling conflict.
Do you want to get to some phone calls?
Yes. If anyone wants to call in and chat about whether it's the earnings call or any of the subjects that we tackled.
AEW, WWE Network, anything that's on your mind for the rest of the show.
If anyone has actually got on to the network, which...
Have they actually started to roll out the rebrand
already?
So
I believe that they have.
Okay.
So for us in Canada, we have to log in through our television subscriber, which for me is Rogers. And every time I've tried, it's just said that the network is updating, and it takes me to the default screen.
I'm in.
You're in?
Yeah.
Maybe this is an issue on my end, so I'm gonna have to. Is it the old network?
Well, actually, I don't get in through the TV network, so
okay.
I get in through a different way.
Oh, okay.
Like I have like an American.
Oh, I don't. I have just the Canadian.
It looks exactly the same.
Okay, so it hasn't flipped over. Okay.
Let's go to Hansi right now on the line. Hansi, thoughts?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Listen, I'm not really too smart with like the financial stuff. That's why I like listening to you guys break it down, because it actually educates my stupid brain sometimes from realizing this. But I'll ask you guys two questions, and one of them is about AEW. And first one was with AEW coming to like TV, which I'm really excited for. I'm excited about the promo packaging and all that they unleashed out. But do you guys have any confirmation or like any idea what is going to happen for Canada by any chance? Like, do you know if there's going to be a solidified network? Do you think TSN will be a viable option, or is it going to be something else?
Listen, I've obviously been asking around. I can't confirm anything, but it sounds like no deal is finalized at the moment. Obviously, if you look at a process of elimination, TSN would be the one that makes the most sense, but I can't say that definitively.
Okay, that's cool. And I know you guys didn't really talk about this, but I want to get your guys' thoughts on this, because I was kind of conflicted on this. I was happy because I don't like that Charlotte is always kind of put in the title feuds, right? And I'm guessing they gave her the bigger match with Trish Stratus. In retrospect, do you guys think that the Trish Stratus match should have been given to Bayley or Becky, because I think that would have been better for the title. Because like it seems kind of forced with Natty. Like, I like Natty. I think she's like she's a great talent. But do you guys think that because they gave Charlotte the bigger match with Trish Stratus, that it kind of like, you know, lowers the title matches, or do you think it's like just fine the way it is? That's just my question for you guys.
I would imagine that it ultimately came down, I'm sure, to the fact that they wanted Trish with a heel and not to mix the reaction for Becky or for Bayley. That the Toronto audience, you would suggest it would be, I still think it'd be a cool atmosphere regardless. But yeah, it seemed like it was an idea that got pitched. And I mean, that's, to me, it's, you can certainly argue if there was more that, like, if Becky could use a bigger program like that, but
it also gets Charlotte on the show, because what else do you do with her?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't have a big issue with the match. I know some people are not crazy about it, but I feel that it's, you know, a pretty solid match to put in Toronto, and I think it's going to get over really big to the crowd, and hopefully I think Charlotte will come out of it as, you know, positioned as like the big female star.
Okay, no, yeah, that's cool. I'm sorry to have much to add about like the quarterly finals and all that. I like talking to you guys weekly, so anytime I get a chance to call in and talk to you guys for like 5 minutes or so, it's always like the highlight of my day. So thank you for taking my call, guys.
Thanks as always, Hansi.
Thanks, Hansi.
We will always pick up on this end. All right. So yeah, you know, that's, I really, it was interesting looking back that there was like a 2.5 minute TV match that Trish did in 2011 with Vicky Guerrero, which it really wasn't a real match. So her last singles match was the Lita match at Unforgiven in 2006. So that's a long time to go without a singles match. And this is going to be, you know, she's that much older. She's 13 years older than the time when she was wrestling regularly. And let's be honest, like, the women's game has just increased significantly since the mid-2000s.
Certainly true. Though, you know, we've seen glimpses of Trish, though, performing in things like the Rumble and also last year's Evolution. And I definitely feel like she looked good. I think good enough, certainly, with that added star power to carry a satisfying matchup. And you have Charlotte in there, who I think many would consider to be perhaps the best person for her to have a great match with. I certainly have more faith in a match like this than maybe what she could have been able to do with Alexa Bliss, as was originally planned last year.
Yep, there's going to be high expectations for this match. I think they're going to have an electric crowd, and I think it's going to be a match that's obviously very well laid out. And I think I feel pretty confident that the match is going to work really well.
Or would you slot it on the show?
Yeah, it's probably going to be one of those marathon shows. I wouldn't want to put it too late into the card, like maybe like midway through, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think the crowd will be like as buzzed for that as like some of the title matches.
I think it's really hard to ever project, like, especially these 6-hour shows. Like, I can get a good gauge 3-hour show where you can kind of position everyone, but 6 hours, you just don't know when a crowd is kind of going to sink, what's going to be a high point that they can't really surpass. Like, Daniel Bryan and Kofi ended up being the peak moment at WrestleMania. I wouldn't have necessarily predicted that, knowing like how hot that women's program was going in, that, you know, it would be, it's just so hard to tell.
They added 3 extra, like 7. It's a 7.
It's a long time, and sometimes it's just, you just don't know when a crowd's either going to deflate or maybe they're going to stay up for certain things. The early construction of the card, I think they have pieced together a number of potential big babyface moments for Canadians that I think should hopefully get a strong reaction, and hopefully they can keep it for most of the show.
How many sharpshooters do we see on the show?
Oh God, I hope none, to be honest. Or save it for one.
You definitely get it with. I will.
Actually, Owens putting Shane in the sharpshooter might get a really big response.
Obviously, in the Natalya match, you'll see it. Do we see it with any of the other Canadians?
I hope it's just reserved for one. It should be only reserved for one. If you are going to do that, maybe we get Brett on this show in some cameo.
I wonder.
Yeah.
In where he can call it the SummerSlam.
The SummerSlam, yes. Didn't have the SummerSlam when I was with the WCW. If anyone wants to get their calls in before we wrap things up on another edition of the Hangout, you can call in 732-800-4423 or Post Wrestling on Skype. We'll be hanging around here for a couple more minutes before we sign out. And then Friday, Wai and I are back on the Post Wrestling Cafe with Rewind Away. And this week we are reviewing the Fallout from Down Under tour from February of 2018, the second night of that tour from Melbourne, Australia, featuring Kenny Omega, teaming with the Gorillas of Destiny against Kazuchika Okada, Tomohiro Ishii, and Rocky Romero. Plus, this was when the Elite were all over this New Japan card. They were kind of the big stars on the show. Plus, Minoru Suzuki against Jonah Rock. A number of Australian stars mixed in on this interesting show, more so to look at where New Japan was in February of 2018 versus now, because it's been a pretty noticeable facelift that they've had.
Yeah, it's not quite a show that I think a lot of people might have made time to watch at the time that they occurred, but I think stepping back out of it now, even after a little over a year, it's incredible to see how different this roster might be. Even some of the people that are on the roster, somebody like a Jay White, how different they are from that point to now. And obviously, you know, in the case of the Elite, I would say maybe more innocent times when they were simply performers on a card, looking to, you know, film segments on BTE versus the high-powered executives that they are right now.
And then on the weekend, we're going to have new editions of Cruel Summer out on the free feed on Saturday and Sunday with WH Park. And on Saturday as well, the Rocky Maivia Picture Show returns with Nate Milton reviewing Gridiron Gang with Mike Mills and Marcus Vanderberg.
And you will be with Phil Chertok for a review of UFC.
Yes, Saturday night, UFC 240 post-show will be out. That card is headlined by Max Holloway and Frankie Edgar, as well Chris Cyborg going into the last fight of her UFC deal against Felicia Spencer.
And 2 editions of our G1 post-shows, Saturday and Sunday.
My goodness.
It will be a long weekend for us.
Yes. We did put up a free edition of our G1 coverage, so you can go to postwrestling.com, free version, and if you like that, we're doing shows after every G1 on the Patreon feed at postwrestlingcafe.com. A show out Saturday, a show out Sunday. There's more than you can handle.
We do it for the truck drivers.
We do it for the truck drivers. That is our
slogan.
Unofficial slogan. It is what it is. So, Wai, it's been a lot of fun getting down into the weeds with you.
Yeah. Go on.
Okay. I was just going to naturally move on to a sign-off from there.
And I was about to naturally go on to playing this beautiful music in the background.
This is wonderful. Some people have graduated from certain areas of that crap. Not us, folks. We always remain grounded. So thank you to everybody for joining us for this special edition of the Café Hangout. A thank you to Brandon Thurston from Wrestlenomics for joining us. You can follow him at Brandon Thurston on Twitter.
And I believe the Wrestlenomics podcast still exists, so he might just like pop up there after a show like after a day like today with bonus audio as well. So subscribe to that.
Yes, absolutely. Check that out. Always great when we get to have him on the Café Hangout. And check out all of our shows coming out this weekend. There's no shortage of them. New edition of Up Next. New edition of the British Wrestling Experience. So much great stuff. Postwrestling.com. For Wai Ting, I am John Pollock, and thank you for hanging out.